Okay, Councillor Lewis, we're now live.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the April meeting of the Executive Board, which is the last one I believe we'll be holding in this format. So thank you to everybody who is watching this meeting, who's not part of the meeting, and we'll be starting the agenda now. So I'm going to item 1 to see if there are any appeals against refusal of inspection of documents.
Thank you, Chair. Appeals to confirm no appeals against refusal of inspection of documents have been received for today's meeting.
Thank you. Item 2, and there are no exempt items.
That's correct.
Item 3 on late items.
Thank you, Chair. With your agreement, since the publication of the agenda, board members have been provided with a report and appendices entitled Update on the Coronavirus Pandemic Response and Recovery Plan for consideration as agenda item 10, and also a supplementary appendix 4 to item 6, which is the Leeds COVID-19 Vaccine Health Inequalities Plan for consideration as part of that agenda item.
Thank you, Gerard. Item 4, are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interest, please? I don't see any indications. Item 5, are we all happy to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of March? I'm going to take it. Everybody's happy with those. Thank you. So we're on to the first item on the agenda, which is the health and wellbeing portfolio. So I'm going to ask Councillor Salma Arif to introduce this paper, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'm very pleased really to bring this report to Executive Board. The report provides an overview of the Leeds COVID vaccine health inequalities plan and the steps we're taking to further increase uptake of the vaccine across all communities in Leeds. The heart of the plan is really the principle that no one is left behind. The approach is not about the numbers of people vaccinated, it's about ensuring that we reach those most at risk of severe illness and death from COVID, and to ensure that the vaccine has the greatest impact. Public Health has been working in partnership with primary care networks from the most deprived areas of the city to develop a bespoke health inequalities plans to respond to community needs. This work is being driven by local insight, working with communities and ensuring that we are listening to what people are telling us. This has resulted in some good practice examples of PCN-led targeted work to develop community outreach offer to increase vaccination uptake. Just some examples that I want to pick out are the drop-in clinics in Bilal Centre and Infinity Centre, supported by PCN staff and community leaders. I was there this morning. The clinics are seeing numbers increasing on literally a weekly basis. I've seen from the very beginning how confidence within these communities has grown and people are walking in and getting the jab. I think the key element from my perspective really in observation is that it is a trusted community centre. It's in the heart of the community. So that's crucial. I also want to talk about the roaming mobile provision. It was launched back in March. We've got 2 vaccine buses with a dedicated vaccine team, which is improving access and providing a rapid response. Again, being data-driven and going into areas where we know uptake is low. The other element I also want to talk about is the community engagement plans that have been developed in areas of deprivation. This includes working with community champions, third sector, faith leaders, LCPs, and building on existing community networks. As the report outlines, our ambition is that no one is left behind and that everyone is able to make an informed choice to take the vaccine leader. I'm also pleased to inform the Exec Board that we have vaccinated 50% of our adult population, a significant milestone for the city. Again, testament to our city and the efforts of every single individual, be it from local volunteers, the security guards, NHS, local PCN, council officers, local partners and community leaders, and of course our residents across the city. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's great news about the vaccination numbers. I know I've been to with Councillor Harlan to see one of our local vaccination centres and also to visit the Ellen Road facility, and it's really impressive the way everybody in the health service, volunteers and other agencies are all working together to make this happen, and I look forward to, when under 45 the call's forward, I look forward to having the vaccine myself. Are there any questions on this paper, please? Councillor Carter.
Yes, thank you. By and large, welcome the paper. It's very positive. I want to just mention one particular area, and that is elderly members of BAME communities who are still taking up the vaccine to a lesser degree than people of the same age in the white community. But the younger generations in the BAME communities are beginning to take up the vaccines. What are we doing to promote amongst family members the need to have the vaccine? Because it seems to me, if there's some skepticism about authority, then to get younger members of the different communities who have had the vaccine to persuade older relatives who are probably more vulnerable and who will probably, if they resist getting the vaccine, not only get COVID themselves, but pass it to other people. I think I'd like to know what especially we're doing in that respect, please.
Thank you. I can see your hand up, Councillor Galton, but I'm going to ask Councillor Arif to come back on that question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And Victoria, you can as well if you wish to come in. It's a good question, Councillor Carter, and an important one as well. Representing Gipton and Hare Hills, which does have a large BAME community, it is certainly something that was recognised. And I think originally there was the hesitancy, but what we're seeing is with the provision of Bilal Centre now being extended, with the provision of Infancy Centre there, and local community leaders playing a role, and we've got the local imams and other leaders that are encouraging the vaccination. I am seeing, and what I'm anecdotally hearing, there is a shift that is happening, and there's various different reasons why people were originally hesitant, but actually if you look at the numbers have started to narrow down. I think from our perspective is just to keep up with that work, and the key thing is it needs to be accessible. Walking into the centres, it's also important that we've got people that are bilingual as well, that can have conversations. So we might have some people that are not originally sure about getting the vaccination who can walk and get the information that they need. But I think you're right in identifying there is some hesitancy, but I do feel that gap is being narrowed now, and the hesitancy is starting to get lesser as we go on. Victoria, is there anything else that you feel that we need to add to this conversation?
Thank you, Councillor Arif, and thanks, Councillor Carter, for the question, which I do agree is a really important one. I think that this is something in terms of uptake of vaccinations with particular communities that obviously has been heightened through COVID, but has been the same for other vaccinations. So, for example, the flu uptake in key groups is a perennial challenge for us. So, in terms of the scale of this being new with COVID, it is absolutely, but the issue is not new. So, this will need to be an ongoing long-term challenge for us. This is not a quick fix over the next few months. We'll need to continue to build in this issue into our longer-term approach, not just for COVID and whatever boosters come in the autumn, but also for flu and other vaccinations going forward. I think specifically to add to what Councillor Arif's already said, absolutely, it's about understanding the different reasons why people are less confident to come forward. Some people just want to wait and see and wait for other family members to have it before they're convinced. We're doing some very specific work with GP practices around a better conversations programme, so they don't just offer the vaccine once and then if it's not uptaken there's no follow-up, but about having high quality conversations to understand and answer people's questions properly. So there's some training and support we're doing for GP practices to have those better conversations with people who are initially hesitant. So that's one key area that we'll continue as a council to do. I think that the next, one of the other strands of work is around the recruitment of community champions. So as well as family members, we have got a community champions programme for other trusted people within communities to talk with people from their own communities. So that's a programme we've set up and will continue alongside the roving provision, etc. So and not to say it's simple and easy and short term, but we will continue to do all of those things, Councillor Carton, but thank you for the question.
Thank you for those responses, and certainly I think we all agree the importance of making sure that as a vaccine is rolled out, nobody's left behind in the programme, so that we know the virus is going to be around for a while, and we don't want people to be missing out and affected by illness in the months and years ahead. I'm going to come on to Councillor Galton, please.
Thanks, Chair. If you can go to page 17 in the report, I have a couple of queries, and it's to do with paragraphs 7.5 and 7.7. 7.5 refers to, apparently, a citywide conversation on the future use of city and local centres. Well, I'm not aware of being involved in that conversation, and I just wanted to know a little bit more about that, so that the district centres, which are mentioned in there, can also be incorporated in it, because we need to build back better after COVID, and obviously we want to make sure that everyone is involved as possible. And then on the 7.7 paragraph, it talks about £250,000 being given to the council from the Arts Council for cultural recovery.
I'm sorry, Councillor Galton, we're still on vaccines.
What do you mean you're still on vaccines? I thought we were doing the COVID
You're
report.
on the wrong page. You're on the wrong paper.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I thought you said it was the recovery paper.
No, we're on to the Vaccine Health Inequalities Plan.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Item 6, Councillor Galton. So you're more than welcome to ask your questions when we get to the correct when we get to the correct paper.
No problem.
Do you have any?
Apologies.
That's no problem. There's a lot of COVID, understandably, on today's exec.
Well, they're all
There's a lot
live
of
as late
COVID
papers, Chair, so
hopefully.
it's a bit difficult to put them back in
clearly
order.
under stress.
To say, hopefully there's not a lot of COVID in this meeting, but obviously there's a lot of items on there.
I'll let you conclude this paper, Chair, so that we can go on to the next one.
Thank you. Very kind, Councillor Galton. Do you have any questions on the health inequalities paper?
No, a job well done. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. If nobody else has any questions on this paper, I'm turning to the recommendations, and is everybody happy to approve the recommendations? I'm going to take it that everybody is, and we will now move on to Councillor Helen Hayden's papers, and item 7, please, in the Levelling Up Fund.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. So this is the responding to the Levelling Up Fund, which many of you will have remembered. It's only last month that in March, the March budget, the government announced the release of several funds to support economic growth and social transition following the country's exit from the European Union. The Levelling Up Fund is to invest in infrastructure that improves everyday life across the UK, including regenerating town centres and high streets, upgrading local transport and investing in cultural and heritage assets. This report sets out proposals for how the council will respond to the government's Levelling Up Fund. There's a very tight time frame, but there is potentially up to £160 million available to the city through the Levelling Up Fund, subject to success through the competitive bidding process. with revenue being made available to the council for resources to support developing bids for future rounds of the LUF, sorry, which sounds a bit like Leeds United, so I'll keep saying levelling up. So I'm here today to ask to support the approach to the Levelling Up Fund and agree to consider proposals in the future before the deadline, prior to the deadline of 18th of June 2021. I mean, it's a very tight deadline, so this is a paper that kind of that sets out our proposals to how we are going to bid then on that June the 18th deadline. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden, and we'll come on to the recommendations later, but we will, as a timetable falls, between this exec board and the next exec board meeting, we will come back together to agree our final bids. I can see Councillor Carter indicating to speak, please.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, welcome the opportunity to bid for substantial amounts of money from the government. One or two issues. It is a tight timescale. I accept that, but nevertheless, it has to be realised, and there's a lot at stake. I'm very concerned that there may be undue haste to pull out plans that officers have had under wraps for years and lob them in. I think it is worth reminding everybody that these schemes will need ward member and member of parliament support. And whilst I agree with the extra, indeed it's essential, the extra exec board meeting to deal with the proposals, what discussions are being proposed with ward members of all parties and with members of parliament of both my party and yours, because there doesn't seem to be any suggestions in here of that. And without the support, we are going to be doomed to failure, which would be a tragedy.
I can assure you that we will be looking to speak with all the MPs of the. In fact, in terms of members of Parliament, if we consider the government's proposals and how we fit the criteria, then it needs to be, each member of Parliament needs to be involved in those discussions, and it needs to be one. Now, we weren't sure when it first came out whether it'd be one project per ward. Actually, in that constituency, sorry, that isn't the case, but there will be 7, and we are working with Wakefield as well, because one of the constituencies is not just a Leeds constituency, it's a Wakefield constituency. So those conversations are already taking place. As for ward members, then it would be, if I'm perfectly honest, in terms of the timescales, in terms of getting each ward member involvement in that would be very, very difficult. Sorry. And it would be very, very difficult. And, but definitely I would always seek to consult with everyone as to what's happening on. But in terms of the members of Parliament, it's already happening. In terms of speaking to Wakefield, in terms of looking at the different constituency, and then when we come up with proposals, I'm very keen not to just have, and because of the time frame, there will be, I quite understand your concern that, Councillor Carter, that there will be what we might refer to shovel-ready projects that we just propose to the government to fund. However, this is really quite a broader range than that, especially with the cultural and heritage supports with that. And I'm really keen to go out to as many people as possible in terms of elected members to see what is in there in different parts of the city, and make sure and really make sure that we try and get equity across the city, coming from, you know, an out kind of a ward that spans both the inner and the outer parts of the city. I'm really keen that it's equitable across across the city, and there's a range of projects. It's not just transport kind of stroke highways ones as well. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Would you like to come back, Councillor Carter? I can see you've got your hand up again.
I would. Councillor Hayden, it's essential that this consultation takes place as a matter of urgency, and it's not the best time in the world because it's local elections, as we all are aware. But it is essential that these discussions take place because, as I've said before, if ward members find things foisted off on them that they have little support for, then they will object, and those objections will be noted by the government. And nobody wants to see Leeds City Council fail in getting its share of this money. But we have to positively engage. And I am relieved to some degree about what you said, but there seems to be a lot of ifs, buts and maybes. And I'd like to hear from the Chief Exec, I think, at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. I think I will, before officers come in, I think I would agree with you about the importance about getting everybody involved, putting these bids together. Is potentially a huge amount of money available, and we don't want to give the government reasons not to grant it to us. I mean, likewise, as I think everybody who's spoken has accepted, the timetables are incredibly short on this, and we do want to make sure, like I say, by the time we come to executive board to discuss this, we do have a good set of proposals and one that everybody is engaged in. I can see Martin Farrington, you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lewis. I mean, I think it's building on what you were saying there, and I would just agree with you, Councillor Carter, that yes, the times are tight, but the ward member consultation has to take place, and we recognise that. I think just to explain, in the paper, we make a positive recommendation in terms of liaising and consulting with MPs, because unusually in bidding rounds, that's how the levelling up fund has sort of been put together. So it's probably a case of not that we're not going to consult with board members, because we will, but what we are going to do also in response to the specific requirements of the levelling up fund is engage as required with the MPs. That is a challenge, but it's a challenge that we're going to have to rise to, Councillor Carter, if that helps.
That's helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Councillor Carter. I'm going to bring Tom in at this point, Councillor Galton, then I'll come to you, please. So, Tom, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just to reinforce, I think what Councillor Hayden said, I think the challenge that we've got is that there's a need for a sequencing here, and as has been said, it's a sort of the shovel-ready element of it, in inverted commas, is important. So what we can't do is consult in that short period every ward member about every single project that might end up in this fund over a 3-year period. What we can do is make sure that we do that where there are projects that may move forward in the first tranche, and that's where we need to work cross-party and work to get our tactics right, so that we've got MPs behind the bids, we've got ward members behind the bids, and we put something forward that works for everybody. So, but it's that sequencing point, I think, which Councillor Hayden rightly said. We won't be able to do all of this straight away. That's the issue.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Galton, would you like to come in now, please? Thank you for being patient.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's the tensions that have all been expressed by everybody here are understandable, because it feels like we're going back to the bad old days of the government running municipal beauty contests for local authorities to bid in to find out what scheme looks best to the minister in charge at the time. And the problem with those schemes is that a lot of the time they were finite, and those at the front of the queue got a good bite at the money, and then eventually it ran out before those at the back of the queue could have access to it. And I think one of the things that should be enabled through the local process, if it can't be guaranteed through the national one, is that the levelling up fund does exactly that, and that each constituency in the city has equal access to the money. They might not all be able to get it in the first round, but we should be planning going forward to ensure that every constituency has some curation of what could be achieved for their area. And I think we also need to have a look at how our communities section is organised, because I think there needs to be a lot more forward planning going forward in terms of transport planning for neighbourhoods, for town centre development in neighbourhoods, so that each area has at least an outline plan that can then be built upon when these pots of money appear from the government and have to be responded to in very short timescales. Because it's only through that pre-preparedness that we'll be able to ensure that we can get every part of the city getting some benefit from schemes like these. And I would really like to see a paper come forward where that can be achieved, because that would be a really vital link between the work which is done in Martin Farrington's development department and what hopes to be achieved on a social equality level from this kind of societal investment.
Thank you, Thank you, Councillor Galton. Martin, you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in, please?
It was just to provide some context to Councillor Galton's question about the amount per constituency or local authority. Whilst it's not for Leeds City Council to determine how much each constituency receives, if you just look at the public figures and the maths, there's 4.8 billion of funding available. If one were to divide that equally across every parliamentary constituency, that would equal £7.3 million per constituency. If you took a different view and said, how does that equate to an equal distribution across the 123 priority one local authorities, of which Leeds is one, that would equate to £39 million. So how that then plays out in terms of different bids is a matter for government, but just on the basis of the maths as they present themselves, that's how they average out, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Martin. Tom, would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Leader. I was just going to make the point that, of course, this isn't the only funding stream that we may benefit from as a city for the next few years, and this is in some ways alongside the Towns Fund, where we've been successful in Morley, and we have the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the sort of other element, the sort of what you might call the repatriated European funding, where I think that's where the piece of work we've got to do can not just hit this one funding stream, but make sure that we're hitting all of them and that the whole city benefits from that. And that may be when Martin comes to answer Councillor Galton's question originally about the paper to come, that might be where we might be able to help with the work that's going on, looking at the local and district centres and the city centre work.
Thank you, Tom. And I think there's both in terms of the short-term objectives of getting as many bids in, which will hopefully be as successful. And I do agree with Councillor Galton that perhaps some longer term, the government should allow us a longer term approach to that. But we are where we are, and having taking this forward, I think is taking it forward. We do need to get that approach to recognise just the nature of our district. Does anybody else want to come in on this paper? No, I'm going to turn to the recommendations, and I will take it that everybody is happy with the recommendations, and we'll move on to your next paper, please, Councillor Hayden, item 8.
Thank you very much. So this is really exciting paper, and it's a proposed grey to green projects, and this is a progress update. So this is an update on the progress of the grey to green infrastructure projects following the successful bid by Leeds Council to the government's Getting Building Fund, and we really welcome this investment by the government. And this was we were awarded this in September 2020, and subsequent full business case approval at WICA Investment Committee in February of this year. So it's notably around the Meadow Lane green space, Sovereign Street Bridge, and Crown Point Road calming and greening. So it's really exciting projects of doing exactly what it says on the tin, of turning the city centre, and in particular quite traditionally quite industrial parts of the city centre, into this green space. And hopefully Meadow Lane will in the future live up to its name. There must have been a meadow there at some point for it to be called Meadow Lane, and it will unlock that kind of the area of the city to more people living there, to enjoying green space, to the economic growth in that part of the city as well. So I present this paper to the board and ask to note the progress, approve the design proposals to allow for progression of the scheme into the next phase of the detailed and technical design. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments on this paper? Councillor Carter, please.
Yes, in general terms, I welcome this. Of the 10.7 million, you're proposing to spend 8.2 million of it's come from the government via West Yorkshire. On that subject, are we masters of our own house in this respect, or will there be control by the newly elected mayor, whoever that may be, with the exception of Councillor Galton, over how these are implemented, these programmes? And I would like to ask the officers whether these designs have taken into account the effects of COVID on the Leeds economy, which has been drastic. And I wouldn't like to think that we are taking steps now in haste that will come back to bite us later in terms of the local economy bouncing back. The schemes in general terms I'm supportive of, but I would like answers to those two questions. One, are the officers confident they have taken into account the effects of COVID and travel patterns, etc.? And two, whether we are in control of these initiatives, or whether West Yorkshire, in whatever guise, will seek to extend its influence or even alter things.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Who would like to answer those very specific questions? Martin, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of the COVID question first, Councillor Carter, and I think you'll recognise this, that from the 2008 City Centre conference, it was highlighted about the lack of green space to the south of the city, and that the council has therefore had a long-term ambition that to address that. And as the cities move forward, you'll be aware that in the South Bank, it's gone from a position where there were no educational institutions a few years ago to having the College of Building, the City Centre College, the Ruth Gorse Academy. We've seen the closure of the Carlsberg site and the aspirations for the City Centre Park to really take shape. So in terms of a fundamental principle of how the South Bank will relate to the North Bank of the city centre, that transition, particularly from the rail station, and making it a walkable transition in a way that one would expect in a city centre, and promote cycling and walking in particular. I think those in a sort of a COVID sense still stand true, and some might argue are even more true as a consequence. And so I'm confident that the principles of the proposal are still the right one, if that helps to answer. In terms of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, the West Yorkshire Combined Authority does administrate the funds that were provided by government. They distribute that through their appraisal process, which is a measure that they have to do. These bids have gone through these appraisal processes, either as outline bids and full business cases, or outline bids with the full business cases to take place, I think, in June. I think against that, they're well down the track in terms of delivery. So I don't foresee any issue in terms of the combined authority and the mayoral authority in the summer changing that position. I mean, I can't say whether somebody wouldn't, but I think it would be unusual for that to be the case, particularly where the funding, as we've got, has to sort of be expended in a short period of time. Hence the reason for bringing it to your attention now.
Thank you, Martin. I can see you want to come back in, Councillor Carter.
Very quickly, would we have a recourse? This is to Martin Farrington. Would we have recourse to the government, who are the ultimate funders of these schemes, should there be any interference in what has effectively been agreed?
Well, I'm not able to answer the detail of that, Councillor Carter. What I would say is, as a hypothetical scenario, I would see it as a very minimal risk, and one that I think we would be able to manage effectively, so that we suitably mitigate it, given that these are long-standing ambitions that the council and the city is now well placed to be able to deliver and achieve the long-term legacy that they afford.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Hayden, do you want to come in on this point, please?
It was actually going back to the COVID point, if I may, if that's all right.
Yes, please.
Because I understand Councillor Carter was talking about kind of the recovery from COVID, and especially for economic terms. But I think this is just the right timing for that expansion of green space in the south of the city, south of the city centre, because as we all, I'm sure everybody on this call has depended on our green space for the last year. We're incredibly lucky in my ward of Temple Newton with our green spaces. And I know that myself and my children and all our community have depended heavily on that. So in order that should anything, and you know, heaven forbid that it does, but anything like this happen in the future, then the people living in and around the south of the river there will have a superb green space to enjoy, so that they can safely be outside and not have to be cooped up inside or on major roads, etc. So I just wanted to add that in. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Galton, thank you again for being patient. Would you like to come in, please?
Thanks, Chair. It was really to follow up the point that was made in the last paper as well, in that this, as I remember, was another funding stream which was very short notice, and it wanted to have shovel-ready schemes that the council could have the money associated with. Oh, Andrew Carter's shaking his head. I can be corrected if that's not the case by Martin Farrington.
I'm partially wrong.
Thank you. Could we all, I don't want to sound old-fashioned, but could we have the meeting through the chair, please? So if you could continue, please, Councillor Galton, and then if any other member officer wants to speak, they can come in afterwards. I'm sorry to be, I know we're on modern technology.
Well, I just noticed, Chair, that in the introduction, in the main issues, it mentioned the Our Spaces strategy, the South Bank regeneration framework, the supplementary planning document, Leeds Public Transport Infrastructure Programme. So there was a lot of planning documents that could be referred to make our case to get our investment from this plan. And it's just a note to say it's right that those people that are in the city centre should benefit from decent green spaces, especially residents. But I would like to see a shift now from the council to recognise that some of this very professional planning work, which has been done historically in the city centre, should now be taken out to some of our communities so that they can benefit from this kind of focus and hopefully some of this short-term investment that does come quite often now from the government.
Thank you, Councillor Gotland. And obviously people in our part of the city have benefited from the St Aidan's Nature Reserve, which is a very professionally planned project that's been underway and delivered over a number of years by the council. I can see Councillor Carter would like to come in, so I'm going to invite Councillor Carter to speak, please.
Thank you. Yeah, just for Councillor Cotton's benefit, he may not quite remember, but the green space suggestions for the south of the city originated in the administration which I led along with one of his colleagues, and in fact it's a little smaller now than we first suggested. Secondly, their money has already gone through at the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, on which he serves, if I am correct, on numerous occasions to reach this stage. So to imply that it has suddenly dropped from the sky with no notice is wholly incorrect.
Thank you,
Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carter.
I was referring to the Better Building Fund.
Would
That's
anybody else like to come
from
in?
the sky? Thanks, Chair.
So I think my internet froze there. Were you speaking, Councillor Gotland? I was going to ask if anybody else wanted to come in.
It was just to clarify my point about short-term money coming from the Better Building Fund, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anybody else want to come in on this item, please? Take it no. So I'm moving to the recommendations, and I assume everybody's supportive. That's great, thank you. So we're going to move on to your final paper, please, Councillor Hayden, item 9.
I do apologise for it's me again. So this is the city centre transformation and the enabling schemes around City Square and out to Armley Gyratory. So this is to facilitate the closure of City Square to through traffic, enabled by rerouting the Loop Road, and what is envisioned, and it's really exciting again, is creation of this world-class public space and arrival gateway at the city centre. So if you can imagine, the beautiful Queen's Hotel, and then coming around to the design triumph that is the Majestic, which it just looks beautiful, around to the old post office, and imagine without those 4 lanes of traffic that we all have to negotiate in front of the Queen's Hotel, it would just be a superb, it is already beautiful, but it'll just be a world-class and kind of gateway to the city centre, arriving on the train or, and coming in, and there it is, Leeds in all its glory laid out in front of you. So this is the outline highway design concept for the closure of City Square and its subsequent implementation in readiness for the agriculture and approval of the preliminary design and implementation of Armley Gyratory as presented. And it obviously subject to any planning conditions and details. And I just want to add in there, it's a very important part of this paper, about the Armley Gyratory and the improvements there, not only to enable City Square, but also to enable the people in the west of the city, in Wortley, Lower Wortley, to have that connectivity in Kirkstall and those areas around there, to have that connectivity and to the city centre, to enable all different modes of transport to be able to access the city centre. So I'll leave it there, Councillor Lewis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Does anybody want to come in on this paper, please? I can see Councillor Galton's got his hand up, and then Councillor Carter. So, Councillor Galton, please.
Thanks, Chair. Two things. When people look at city centre investment and complain about it not happening in their area, one of the things that sometimes irks is when some of the money that gets spent doesn't actually work. Some of these images have got some lovely fountains in them, and this city has not got a really good record on the delivery of water features in public spaces. So can I have some assurance that some extra due diligence has happened in the area to ensure that that which is pictured can actually be delivered and kept over the long term? And then on a more serious point, on the Armour Gyratory, it's a very difficult junction to actually make livable for motorists, let alone try and involve other aspects of active travel as well. One of the things that's become apparent more recently is the issue around women and how they feel safe in the public realm, and how we can respond to make sure that that issue is taken into consideration when we're making planning decisions. And as there's a lot of active travel around here, but it's also not a very amenable environment in terms of lighting, etc. Have we taken that into consideration in the design of the scheme? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Come back, Chair?
Yes, please, Councillor Hayden.
Oh, thank you. In terms of the technical planning, I mean, Councillor Carlisle and officers are doing incredible work around active travel and making it safe. And as for the technical, I'll leave that to officers to explain what's gone in. But it is all about that connectivity. Armour Gyratory is a very inhospitable environment, like you say, even if you're in a car. In fact, I find it quite scary at times. But this will make huge improvements. It's not going to be anything other than it is in the end, but it will be hugely improved on what it is now. And we are always taking into account active travel in kind of all in the various schemes that are around the city centre and connectivity to the outer areas as well. As for the water fountains, yes, it's very frustrating. Those are only indicative drawings though. I would love to have fountains working but there is going to be a design competition. So those are just indicative drawings of what it possibly could look like. There is going to be a design competition, and then it'll be chosen as to which design, and it may or may not involve fountains. But I will do the due diligence to see if they're working or not. Promise.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Very practical there. Does anybody else want to come in on this item? I can see Gary's got his hand up, and then I'll come to Councillor Carter, please. So Gary would like to come in. Gary Bartlett.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to confirm what Councillor Hayden has just said then about the fountains. We're just, as officers, we're just doing some interviews at the present time for some potential designers for City Square. So it's very much the images that are attached to the report are indicative. Some of the designs that are coming forward do include water features, and certainly we will make it very clear that if they do come forward, ultimately the adequate revenue is there to support them in the long run. So certainly that's the case on that one. In terms of Army Gyratory cyclists and walking, absolutely, I've been on site there many times recently to look at this scheme. It's very inhospitable, as has been said. It's very unpleasant, but people do walk and cycle through this area now, and just to confirm that the designs that are coming forward do take that into account and try to make it safer, certainly in terms of lighting, landscaping, and literally just making sure that there's more visibility for all users in the area to aid security. So fundamentally, yes, we're taking that into account in the design.
Thank you, Gary. Martin, is it on this point, please?
Yeah, it was just to say, Leader, that I understand the challenge on the fountains, and it is something that I've given a lot of thought to over recent years. So if Councillor Galton or Councillor Hayden want me to apprise them of the challenges, then I'll be able to do so outside of this meeting. And I think in terms of what Councillor Galton says, in terms of the connections point, I think it's a very fair challenge. I think the design that has been brought to Executive Board is the current design. That doesn't mean it can't be improved as it moves forward. And if there's anything that Councillor Galton wants to bring forward as suggestions to how that can be improved, then that would be most welcome.
Thank you, Martin. I'm going to bring Councillor Andrew Carter in now, please. Thank you for being patient.
It's no problem. Delighted to hear the comments about water fountains. A predecessor of yours, Liz Minkin, of course, was very keen on water fountains. We got one in Millennium Square that didn't work properly, and we got them down in City Square that didn't work properly. And Martin Parrington will, of course, well remember that we had to shut them down altogether when the Conservatives and Lib Dems took over because they were a health hazard. So it isn't just a question of that what appears on paper works. It's that what's happening underground works and works properly, and that maintenance and revenue costs are properly taken into account, because they are incredibly expensive to maintain, and they may be very nice when they're first installed, but they very quickly become a drain on the public purse, and indeed possibly even a health hazard. So I'm delighted that you're taking on board the comments. And Martin Farrington, of all people, as he was in the development department then when we had to shut them down, will recall that very well. The Army Gyratory, there's no argument. It's bad news for any form of transport as it stands. It's the way I come into Leeds, so I know it well. You take your life in your hands in a car half the time to safely negotiate it. And if that can be improved, it is welcome. But just to come on to City Square, it's one of these schemes that's long been in someone's bottom drawer. And it doesn't surprise me that it comes out now, but there are interesting points, I think, that need making. One key area that needs to be understood, I think, is how traffic is going to get from the south of the city centre to the north, for example, Bridgewater Place to the Civic Hall. Now, it's all very well, and I agree that we don't want through traffic in the city centre. It's a destination. But it seems to me we're risking putting a cork into a bottle if we're not very careful. Because what we don't want to do is stop people genuinely coming to the city centre, either by train, by bus, walking if they can, and more people are coming to live with it near to the city centre, and by car. And it just seems to me that if we're not very careful, we are going to sacrifice footfall in the city centre in a bid to stop through traffic. And it would be nice to think that we can find a way of doing both. Ensuring that people can visit Leeds, any form of transport, but that we don't have traffic churning through the middle of the city when it should be, in fact, going round. Just one point on that. If we're directing traffic away from the A621 to Armley, potentially we're adding miles to the journey. That increases emissions and time delays and congestion. If I'm correct in assuming that, then we're going to add to pollution if we're not very careful, rather than reduce it. And I would like that particularly addressing.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Who would like to answer those questions, please?
Can I come in? I mean, I'm not an expert, and there are other, Gary might want to come in. But in terms of the increased pollution, as far as I understand it, and I can be corrected, if you're in a standing a queue of traffic, as often is the case on that road going up past the station, up into City Square and through City Square, it's pre-pandemic, it was, nose to tail most of the time. That increases pollution rather than moving traffic, and the speed that people go to contribute to different levels to pollution as well. So, and in terms of the air quality there's the carbon emissions, and then there's the air quality. In terms of air quality within City Square and that area, it'll be vastly improved by no through traffic. And if by improving that, and the plans are to improve access to active travel and to bus and train, then pollution will be reduced if less people have to use the car to come into Leeds. We're not about stopping people coming into Leeds in their car, but in terms of our major public realms and public spaces, then there is very little need for people to travel through them in a car. There are other ways of getting around the city and going from one part to the next without actually going through the heart of the city centre. We also have our fabulous park and rides, which are very, very popular and expanding as well. So, and as you say, quite rightly, it's a destination. Park your car at the park and ride. You can charge your electric vehicle up if you have one, and get the bus will take you very quickly into our fabulous city centre. I don't know if anyone has got more technical knowledge than I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary Bartlett, you've got your hand up, please.
Thank you, Leader. I think Councillor Hayden's covered off most of the points, actually, but probably just a couple of additional ones to add. Yeah, I think what we're talking about here is trying to maximise movement capacity, if I can put it in those terms. So we're trying to improve the lot for pedestrians, cyclists and public transport users so that they all benefit and are able to move in and around the city in a much better way. And we're certainly not trying to ban or ban access into the city centre by car. There might be slightly different routes that people might have to take, but if people need to access the city centre by car for business or other reasons, then they will still be able to do that under these proposals. Just a bit more technical work. Clearly, there's a lot of transport modelling work that will be done to support this, and has already been done. And that will go through not only WICA processes, but also the planning application that we have to follow here as well. So all those issues around pollution, extra miles and all that will be covered off in that application. So an enormous amount of technical work that will support those processes, given that, yeah, we all know how important Army Gyratory is to the transport network of the city.
Thank you, Gary. Does anybody else want to come in on this item, please? I can't see anybody else indicating to speak, so I'm going to suggest that we turn to the recommendations and ask, is everybody happy to support the recommendations? And I'm going to take it that's a yes. So we'll move on to my papers now. And the first one is item 10, the update on the coronavirus pandemic response and recovery plan. And first of all, I think before speaking to this item, it's worth just reflecting that we know that 1,608 people in Leeds have lost their lives due to COVID, and I'm sure I speak for the whole executive board and everybody here that our thoughts are with everybody who's been affected by this. The report goes on to set out some of the up-to-date information at the moment. Pleasingly, our infection rate is falling, and it's fallen by 32% over the last week, which is really positive for everybody that's been involved in that work. So we're now, although we're above the national average, we are below the Yorkshire and Humber average. So I think that's a good news, and good news it's moving in the right direction. Since we last met as an executive board, we've moved through another steps on the plan to unlock things and unlock things with retail, all retail, personal services and outdoor hospitality opening, and we've worked to support businesses right across the city to do that in an effective way to get businesses back up and running, but also to do it safely and putting resources into that. So that's positive, and we'll see 2 further steps before we meet again as an executive board. So there's a lot of information in this report. We're asked on the recommendations to note the updated response and recovery plan. So like I said, there's a huge amount of information on here, so I shall stop my introduction now and ask if there are any questions. And I can see Councillor Galton got his hand up first. We already had a preview of these questions, Councillor Galton, so what would you like to ask, please?
I'd like to refer to the questions I made earlier, Chair. Just to remind, it is page 17 and it's the paragraph 7.5 and 7.7. First referring to an area of a citywide conversation on the future use of city and local centres and why I haven't heard about it. And the second was an arts grant about the reopening and welcoming back visitors and whether or not that could be incorporated into welcoming back visitors across the city. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, clearly on 7.7, it's for our museum and gallery sites, so they are located across the city. In terms of the question you had on 7.5, who would like to answer that one, please? Martin, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I mean, just on the first point, Leader, my understanding is that the arts grant was to provide enhanced sound and lighting facilities for the town hall and the Carriage Works Theatre, and particularly to aid their ability to then stream live events during a period of lockdown. But I can get clarification on that if it helps for members. In terms of the conversation, again, I mean, I can clarify and look into it further, Councillor Galton, but I think that's a consultation exercise that's been promoted through the council's website, and in terms of the economic updates that have gone to members, it's been flagged there and through the outbreak control board. So I think, you know, that's how it's been flagged as an opportunity to participate in. But if you want a specific briefing on it, I'm quite happy to do that, and then you can sort of engage through that route as well if it's helpful to you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Martin. It's certainly gone out in the updates we've sent out. Councillor Carter, did you want to come in on this item, please?
Yes. The first question is to Victoria Eaton, and that is on the situation at the hospitals at the moment. And actually, it's a question about resuming or speeding up the treatments that have been delayed because of COVID, and what the situation now is. That's worrying an awful lot of people who've been, shall I say, their treatments have been phased back or put on hold because of the COVID situation. So I'd like an update on that. And secondly, I'd like an update on the grant situation for businesses. I am told that other adjacent local authorities are likely to have expended and sent out all their grant monies very, very shortly. What is the timescale for the Leeds grants to be completed and sent out? And I may want to come back on that.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Victoria Eaton, would you like to answer the first question, please?
Thanks, Leader. Thanks, Councillor Carter. So yeah, in general terms, as you're aware, the situation in the hospital is very much improved. The latest numbers we had on inpatients with COVID was 37 overall and 5 in intensive care, which is a greatly improved picture. And we understand that the hospital is still running just one COVID ward, which is incredibly positive, which frees up its other capacity to tackle the backlog of other procedures. It is absolutely the priority of not just the hospital, but the rest of the NHS system to look at the backlog, because in primary care also we'll have a huge backlog of people with long-term conditions who've not had health checks. Some of the public health services we commission in primary care, haven't been carried out to the extent they would have been. So there's backlogs right across the system. I will need to ask the hospital to give a detailed update on what that's looking like in terms of any numbers they've got available, Councillor Carter, because I don't have that information at the moment. The conversations that we've been part of the moment is around NHS partners going through people on the waiting list across all specialties and prioritising them across the board with the capacity they've got. But we don't have any numbers at hand now, but I'm happy to ask that question and get back to you on that.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that, please, Councillor Carter?
Very quickly, I think we have a briefing tomorrow, Victoria, so we could perhaps touch on that then.
Thank you. And who would like to answer Councillor Carter's second question about grants, please? Martin, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, we've taken a decision, Councillor Carter, that has allocated 96% of the monies. So the task now is to manage that through and distribute those sums. We've brought additional staff in to help us do that, and we have trained them in our financial management system to support us in that. And the current position is that we're working as quickly as we can with all the resources that we can apply to meet the revised deadline that the government brought forward to expend the monies by the end of June. So, I mean, I can give you a specific briefing on the current figure that I don't have to hand today, but I'm happy to do that outside of this meeting, Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Martin. Would you like to come back, Councillor Carter, please?
Yes, I would welcome that, Mr. Farrington, please, because my understanding is that other adjacent local authorities will indeed have expended their money by the deadline of the end of June, and the businesses would have received the grants. That's not the case in Leeds, and I'd like that clarifying, please.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to come in on this item? Okay, is everybody happy with the recommendations? Taking silence as yes, so we're going to move on to my next item, item 11, which is the financial health monitoring report and the provisional outturn for the year 2020-2021. I think the significant fact in this paper is that despite everything that happened in the year, we are presenting a balanced position for the budget. We know from previous discussions at Executive Board that has taken a huge amount of work, including the use of some reserves, but it is really pleasing that we've got ourselves to this position without needing external intervention. I'd like to place on record my thanks to everybody on Executive Board and officers who have worked to get us to this position. It's a good achievement and not one that every council has managed. There's as usual with the financial health monitoring reports, there's a huge amount of information in the report. I don't intend to say more in introducing the paper, but more than happy if anybody has any questions to raise on this paper. Councillor Carter, please.
No questions on this particular occasion, but join you in congratulating Victoria Bradshaw and the whole of the team and Neil Evans for their work on the council's budget in what's been a difficult year. I voiced my criticism of the council's budgetary position and our external auditors' comments. So in the budget meeting, I won't repeat them, but we will get to a balanced budget by hook or by crook by the end, the final report on this last year's budget.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. I'm sure officers will appreciate your comments. If there's no other comments on this paper, I'm going to turn to the recommendations and check that everybody is happy with those recommendations and the paper is approved. Take it from silence, that's the case. So we now move on to Councillor Pryor's portfolio and item 12, please, Councillor Pryor, if you'd like to introduce it.
Thank you, Leader. So this is the outcome of the statutory notice on the proposal to establish a resource provision at St Margaret's C of E from this September. So initial consultation took place on these proposals between November 20th and December 18th last year. These proposals are to create a 12-place resource provision at St Margaret's for pupils with complex communication difficulties on the autistic spectrum. This is an outstanding school, and this is in an area where there is real need for these places. I will leave it there for an introduction.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. Are there any questions or comments on this paper? There aren't, so I'm going to move to the recommendations and seek approval from the board. I take it from silence that everybody is accepting the recommendations. So we're on to our last item, item 13, which is Councillor Venner, please, if you could introduce the paper.
Thank you, Leader. I'm really delighted to bring this report. I'm very proud that Leeds has maintained a youth service. Many authorities don't run youth services anymore. The youth service has been decimated over the last decade, and it's been very much a decision to retain it in Leeds. I'm particularly delighted to bring this paper because the last thing the Labour group did before the pandemic and lockdown was to approve this model, but then COVID happened, and also the financial situation that put the council in. But during all the discussions about budgets, it was a decision and a commitment to not cut funding out of youth work. Before getting to the point of developing the model, there was a long period of consultation, really over the 3 years before that, with children, young people, elected members, providers, and there were 3 very well attended workshops in the summer of 2019 of providers internally and externally, which very much informed the model. The model starts from a commitment that no single ward will get less youth work provision than they're currently getting, and the wards of highest deprivation will get more provision. So there are 3 elements of the model. The core offer delivered by our youth work service for 11 to 17-year-olds. Actually, in addition to no ward getting less, that the core service is enhanced by £500,000, which is for the life coach team, which is a new team specifically to address the mental health needs of children and young people and enable the youth service to be able to do individual work with people. There's then the enhanced offer, which is for wards of higher deprivation. There are 2 elements of that. Contracts of 3 to 5 years, which are for our third sector providers. And that has the flexibility to work with children under the age of 11 and over the age of 17. And then grants of 1 to 2 years, which could be delivered by our internal service or external providers. And that's for discrete time-limited projects to address specific issues as they arise. In addition to this, there's, we're currently in the process of consulting around implementation with providers. There's strands of work within the model around communications, a review of buildings we could use for youth work, and also developing consistent monitoring and evaluation for internal and external provisions so that we've got a consistent way of monitoring the efficacy of youth work. The next phase will be designing the specifications for the external contracts, which are going to be in the 3 wedges of the city. And we will be involving the Communities Directorate in that and working with them to look at how we can bring youth work and communities work closer together, which they used to be. The youth work qualification used to be youth and community work, and it changed over the last 20 years. But actually, it would be really beneficial to link our youth work into work like the priority networks, priority neighbourhoods work that communities do. So I'm very happy to bring this paper, and I will leave my introductory comments there. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Are there any questions or comments on this paper? I take it that, Councillor Dalton's put his hand up. Would you like to come in, please?
Thanks, Chair. I did have a conversation about this with children's services officers, because I know that it's been said no area will lose out on what they're currently getting. But if what they're currently getting is not very much, that's not much of a consolation, really. And this review seems to have not come to any conclusions which are different to what the status quo was anyway, except to emphasise that even more funding should be concentrated in fewer areas. I would like to see this relationship that Councillor Venner talks about with the communities section in terms of enabling youth and community work, because I think the ability to engage young people in outer areas of the city is very much disabled by the lack of capacity which is there at the very beginning from youth services to have time to curate those kind of relationships. But if a model can be found through those conversations that Councillor Venner is talking about, then fair enough. But at the moment, I've got a situation where the deprivation levels in wards are based on individual super output areas in terms of their deprivation index. And in my ward, the areas with the highest deprivation tend to get cut in half, and then those poorer communities are associated with very high-end housing, which basically diffuses the need which is actually there in those estates, and they don't get the attention that they require. I would like to see in a review a much more flexible response to recognise those pockets of deprivation in outer areas which will need just as much attention from our youth services as those estates and communities nearer the centre of the city who are currently getting that focus.
Councillor Venner, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, I would like to come back, thank you. As I stated in my introduction, not only is no ward getting a reduction, but we do have the enhancement of the life coach team, which reflects the fact that we know there is a desperate need, especially after the pandemic, for more resource around children's mental health. But I'm not going to apologise for directing resources where they are most needed in our wards of higher deprivation. Although we have protected the youth service in this round of budget cuts, over the last 10 years, as the council's lost 2 billion, we have taken millions out of our youth service. And it is a lesser resource than it was. And it is the right decision to direct money to the wards of higher deprivation. But we know that there are pockets of deprivation in outer areas and in areas that are not considered areas of deprivation. And I would remind Councillor Galton that you have got the Youth Activities Fund and you have got wellbeing funding, which is also funding that's been protected and indeed increased in the last few years. And if you were concerned about areas within your community committee area, you can commission youth work, as I do in my ward. So there is that flexibility that you have yourself as a community committee, but it is the right thing to direct resources to the wards with highest deprivation. And that's why we're doing that in this model. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Does anybody else want to come in on this item? I can't see anybody else wanting to come in, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations. And do we all agree the recommendations? I take it that everybody is happy with those recommendations. So we've agreed item 13, and that brings us to the end of this executive board meeting. So thank you, everybody, for attending. And we've got a slightly early finish, so we can all run out into the sun and play out nicely. So thank you, everybody.